All right, today we are talking about that pesky problem of when your dog won't take treats. You know you want to use positive reinforcement training, but if your dog won't take food, what are you supposed to do? And I hear this a lot. My dog doesn't care about treats in this situation or whatever the problem situation is. So we are going to talk about why that happens so that you can look at the situation with your dog and analyze whether or not that's what's going on with you or some other, there's some other reason for your dog not eating. And then we'll talk a bit about what to do, how to fix it. All right, let's jump into the slides. And as always, if you are live in the group, you can comment or ask questions underneath the video, and I'll be able to see them. It'll just be a second. Actually, let me quickly make sure I have the comments window up. There we go. All right, so my dog won't take treats. I called this the at-home edition because we may do another one talking about dogs outside the house, like reactive dogs or fearful dogs on walks. But today we're focusing on dogs who are fearful, especially of people, visitors, strangers, less preferred family members. And a lot of this happens, although not all of it, a lot of it happens at home. So if your dog won't eat around people in some circumstances, or won't eat around any person maybe except you, which does happen, what the heck is going on and how are you supposed to get past this problem? So what we're going to talk about today, this is actually going to be a two-parter. This week, we're going to talk about why dogs refuse to eat sometimes, what else might be motivating your dog in that moment if food isn't on the list. And then we'll talk some today about practical approaches to get your dog to eat in the situations you need them to in training. And then we'll continue on in next week with some more practical stuff, some more applications. Okay, so what we're talking about in this situation are dogs who won't eat around, for instance, visitors to your house, maybe some family members that your dog isn't comfortable with, a new family. If you've got a newly adopted dog, sometimes the newly adopted dog, if they're fearful, won't eat when you're around. Let's take a look at, I have some real life examples here of dogs refusing food. Okay, so this is our newly adopted dog, Pancake, and this was a little while ago. My husband is trying to offer a treat. He will not take it. Here's another situation, same, my husband and little Pancake holding out a piece of ham. Maybe not. This is Pancake maybe a year ago with me. Won't take treats from me. This is a client... pup we're working with right now. That's our wonderful trainer, Rachel in the foreground. And this is their first meeting. And the dog is totally disregarding the very high value food she's tossing. I think she's tossing meatballs. Here's another one. Another client dog sniffs that, and that's chicken. Sniffs the chicken and then disses it, basically. Says, no, I can't eat that right now. Okay. So how can we understand this in a way that will help us help our dogs so that we can get past this hump in training, this challenge? I often in the past have lost sight of this, that eating is behavior, just like all the other behaviors that we're trying to teach our dogs. We tend to think of food as a reinforcer. Food is a thing and we use it as a reinforcer. And we forget that the eating of the food is the behavior that's reinforced by, getting the food. There are some good resources on this topic. I think Debbie Jacobs has a talk. I don't know if it's recorded, but you could check out her group Fearful Dogs. She did a talk somewhat recently on eating as behavior and dogs who are fearful and won't eat around you. And I think Kathy Sadeo also, sometime in the last year or two, has given talks about this at some dog training conferences, but those might be accessible if you Google them and search for them. But because eating is behavior, we can put it into our framework that we've been working with. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, these are our 3 sort of pieces of the behavior puzzle where we can intervene to change behavior. We've got at the bottom, we have consequence. So what does the dog get out of the behavior? That's kind of the why. Like, why does the dog do the behavior? We've got the opportunity to do the behavior. In what situations does that behavior get the consequence? And then at the top, we have motivation. And that's kind of the, chronologically the first thing. Is the dog motivated to get the consequence in the first place? If they're not motivated to get the consequence, they're not going to do the behavior, even if the opportunity arises. So when it comes to food, what are our consequences? So I wrote yum here, but basically tasty, right? Food is naturally reinforcing for most of us most of the time. And that goes for dogs and humans. So there's a yum factor, the taste, and then there's also the sort of negative reinforcer of decreased hunger if the dog is really hungry and then they eat and they feel less hungry. So those are a couple of the consequences that we can keep in mind. The opportunity in the situation that we're talking about, where you have visitors or whatever training setup you're trying to work in, you're presenting food probably. You or the visitor is presenting food. And then normally, the motivations at play to get the food would involve either physical hunger, so the dog's hungry and they want something, or I think we can all agree that we don't have to be hungry to eat or to enjoy food. So I put scent here as kind of a placeholder for perception of food that is associated with maybe past learning history of something tasty. So your dog smells bacon cooking or something and their mouth starts watering. They may not be actually physically hungry, but they'll still be motivated to, work you for bacon. So motivation is either physical hunger or, they smell the food, they see the food, they want the food. The opportunity to do the eating behavior is you offer it to them or the visitor offers it. And the consequence, if they eat it, is that it, tastes good, and if they were hungry, they don't feel as hungry. Now, what happens when a dog is refusing treats? Most of this picture may not change. So a dog who is refusing treats, if they were sort of deprived of food and hungry before, they're still hungry, and they can still smell the food, and the opportunity is still there. You're still offering them the food. And the consequence is also the same. Well, in theory, they can taste the food. They may have decreased hunger if they eat it. So what changes in this picture? And if anyone has an idea, you can go ahead and put it in the comments. When your dog, normally your dog would take a strip of bacon from you, no problem, doesn't matter how hungry they are, anytime. All of a sudden, they won't take it. The opportunity is still there. The tastiness is still there. So likely what we're dealing with here is a motivation problem. That they don't maybe feel as hungry, or they're just not motivated to get this consequence, that they're not motivated by the taste of food right now. And why would a dog not be motivated to get food? So this is the motivation for food that we're talking about. And there are quite a few reasons, actually, why a dog or a person might have decreased motivation to eat. Obviously, if you're sick, if you're really full, some medications can decrease appetite. That can make food less appealing. You're less motivated to eat. Sometimes you or your dog can have a negative learning history with a food. So if you've ever had food poisoning, you know that often later, whatever you ate before you were really sick, even if you really liked it before, you're no longer very excited to eat it again. Dogs can have something similar. They can also learn that, say, every time before something scary happens, like a visitor comes over, you're in the kitchen cooking chicken, they could start to feel not that great about chicken or the smell of chicken, become kind of worried or suspicious when they see you prepping the chicken. But if your dog would take the food normally, so you think that, as far as you know, they're physically healthy and they don't have a particularly bad history with a particular type of treat or food, then most likely we're talking about this third issue, which is the reason why the dog has decreased motivation to eat is because it is being overwhelmed by more pressing motivations. And when we're talking about fearful dogs, which many of you have, And fearful, by the way, goes under the guise of many labels. I noticed in our group today, people were talking about dogs being fearful, aggressive, territorial, dominant. Anytime you have a dog showing what we would call aggressive or fearful behavior, these are the dogs we're talking about. So they have something else that is motivating them that is much stronger than their motivation to eat. And the shorthand for this that we talk about with fearful dogs is they're motivated by keeping themselves safe and surviving. Even if they're not actually in danger of not surviving, they don't know that. Okay, so how can we increase the motivation for food in these dogs that are currently struggling with these much bigger motivations? So we're going to look at how can we decrease those other motivations so that our motivation that we want to use, motivation for food, can rise up closer to the top. Now, we talked about this in the past when we talked about what motivates fearful dogs to do fearful or aggressive behaviors. And if you remember, or for those of you who are new, usually, not always, but usually at least our working hypothesis is that a dog who either flees something with fearful body language or barks, growls, charges, snaps, bites, their motivation is to get distance from something that they find scary or unpleasant, and the consequence that they're motivated to get is getting that thing farther away from them. So this could be one of those big motivations that our dogs are fighting with when we're just trying to get them to eat a treat and they don't want it. So how can we shrink that? We want to shrink that down so we can get motivation for food. The 3 areas we have to work with when it comes to changing essentially how scary the thing is so that they're less motivated to drive it away, and in this case it is a person or a visitor. We've got anti-anxiety medication, environmental changes, and training. We talked a bit about medication last week. We're going to talk about environment today because without changing the environment, we can't get to training. So how can we change the environment so that your dog is less motivated to keep themselves safe and survive and more motivated to eat so you can train? It kind of depends on what makes people scary to your dog in particular, but there are some common threads amongst fearful dogs that we see over and over. One is proximity. So a person or stranger being closer to them is scarier than someone farther away. The behavior of the person matters. Many of you may have noticed that someone, you or a stranger or a family member, if they're staring at your dog or reaching toward them or bending over them, that's worse than if they're ignoring them. So behavior of the person matters. And then familiarity, which really means learning history with the person, also matters. Someone that your dog knows and has a history of being paired with good stuff, with treats or whatever, positive reinforcement, they'll be less motivated to drive that person away. We're not going to really get into that today because in order to get to that point, we need to get the dog to take positive reinforcement, right? So we're going to deal with these first 2, the proximity and the human behavior. Okay, so how do we decrease our scariness factors? Closeness and behavior of the person. So we want the stranger farther away, right? Or the visitor or the family member. And sometimes that means really far away. Sorry, I've got a dog foraging behind me. Sometimes that means really far away. Sometimes that just means a couple steps away, but farther away than they are when the dog won't eat. So one thing we can do is to avoid or prevent approach, and that's on both sides of the equation. That means keep your dog from approaching because dogs will approach things they're not comfortable with sometimes, and we would like them not to do that. And also to keep the visitor, stranger, or family member from approaching, which is significantly more difficult. Some practical ways to do this are to use a leash on the dog, since you can't use it on the person. If you have a leash on your dog, you can at least prevent your dog from going closer than they really should go. You can also use things like gates and crates to maintain distance. Awesome. And I do see your questions, by the way. I'm going to get to them after I go through these couple videos. Excuse me. So let's take a look at some examples of let's take a look at some examples of keeping more distance between the stranger and the dog using stuff like leashes and gates. I think it's this video. Okay, so here is that dog that earlier was ignoring food from Rachel, our trainer. And now they're keeping, I still would like a little more distance here, to be honest, but they're keeping a little more distance apart, and he's starting to take food, which is a good sign. Here is Coco on leash, so she won't be allowed to approach the person too close. Here's a example of a gate. I like this kind of thing when you're having people in the house sometimes. So the stranger can stand some distance from the gate, and actually, even if they're the kind of visitor that loves dogs and really wants to interact with your dog, a gate will at least usually slow them down because there's some effort involved in trying to get through it, and then hopefully you can stop them before it's too late. So this maintains, at least a little bit of space there. This is Pancake. That's my husband. I'm sorry for my camera work. I was holding my phone at my desk. This was early on up here, and he had been doing some barking and growling at my husband. So here I have him in the crate to keep him at least a several foot distance from the door, where my husband would pass by. And then he'll take food when I toss it to him. And here's another example of using a baby gate. This is again in our house. We don't use this very much anymore, but at this stage, sometimes Pancake would make the less desirable choice to close distance to run at my husband and bark at him and growl. So having this gate up also slowed down my husband, by the way. He could have just walked into the room, but you have to lift the latch, lift up the baby gate so you can open it. So this worked well actually on both sides to maintain enough distance. And then if I needed to, that would give me enough time to say, hey, do you need to come in here? Let me just move him really quick. So here he is staying by me and I'm giving him food. At this distance, he can eat and is okay with it. And there's nothing special about the distances I'm showing in these videos. Your dog may need much more distance or less. This is just what happened to work in these examples. Okay, so leashes and gates, one thing to try out. A big one is space to retreat. You always want your dog to have the option of moving away from something that they might be afraid of or react toward. We don't want their only option to be to try to drive something away proactively by lunging, barking, growling, snapping. We always want them to have that option to retreat. And oftentimes, that can make a lot of difference in your dog's motivation to drive something away. If they have the option to move themselves away a little bit, they may do so and be able to take food. So, ways I like to leverage space when working on training with strangers or just people your dog is afraid of. If you have to have them in the house, make sure your dog has a route out of wherever the stranger is going to be into another room, out into the backyard, something like that. Often even easier and better for many dogs who are fearful of people is to work outside so you have much more space. I think I have... Let me just take a look. Oh, here we go. Okay, I have a couple video examples of ways to use space. So in this example, Rachel is working with a client dog who, on first meeting just would bark and growl at her. And they went to a green belt, so an open green space. Her dad, the dog's dad, has the dog on leash to maintain a good amount of distance. And this is more distance than, would be easily achievable at home in the house. And the other thing that's nice is she can toss the Frisbee. So this dog loves her Frisbee. And so that's what we were using for these early introductions. Here's another, slightly later intro, I think, out on the street. So still see plenty of space to move around and to throw a Frisbee if you like. She's also using a long line here, which, gives the dog a lot of freedom in their movement. Obviously, you don't want to give them freedom to go all the way up to a visitor if they may behave aggressively. But it can help in this kind of training as long as you have enough space to use a long line safely. It would be hard for her to chase a Frisbee without being on the long line. Here's another of our little clients who's a little bit fearful and sometimes, barks at people and strangers. And here 2 of our trainers are sitting with him at a park looking at people all the way on the other side of this field. So talk about space. He's looking, he checks them out, and he's like, hey, don't I get some food for this? Yes, you do. So here he's happily taking food, whereas if you were closer to those people, he would be much less likely to be able to eat. Here's our pup Grizzly again. He was the one that turned down chicken in the previous video. He is now at looking at people, I think. Oh, we're not going to see the trigger. Look at something quite a greater distance away, and then is able to take a treat and just trot away happily. Here's an in the house example of having a retreat route. So this is Pancake last year sometime, and I'm gonna try to hand him a treat. And he had been taking treats from my hand, or I probably would have been a little more careful here. I think I moved kind of quickly, but he has the option, which he will use, of running right outside the dog door. So, then with hindsight, I'd say, okay, I probably shouldn't have reached for him. He, for whatever reason, something about that wasn't okay with him. But I'm glad he had that option to move away. Alrighty. The last thing I wanted to mention, and I was looking for videos of this and couldn't find any on short notice. I'll keep looking. I'm sure we have some somewhere. Is another way to control that distance, to make sure that you have enough distance that your dog is less motivated to drive somebody away, and therefore, remember, the motivation to eat can come up in priority. Avoid conflict with food. Any kind of setup that puts your dog in a position where they have to choose between something really, really high value, like a piece of bacon or a greasy meatball, and moving away from something scary. So where you'll often see this, and this always gives me a little bit of anxiety when I see videos of this, is people have the right idea. They say, okay, well, my dog is fearful of strangers, so I'm going to have strangers give him treats when they come over. But if a stranger is trying to hand feed your dog treats, what does that mean? That means they have to approach all the way and touch the stranger in order to get the treat. So basically make distance go down to 0. And you have a stranger reaching, which, remember, is one of those behaviors that humans do that creeps dogs out a little bit. And you can often end up with, I've seen this happen several times now, a dog who will go up because they really want that food. And then they realize they're in over their head and they bite the person who is offering them a treat. So avoid hand feeding when you're working around people your dog is afraid of. And I mean hand feeding by the visitor. If they'll take food from your hand and they're comfortable with you, that's fine. But don't ask a stranger or visitor to hand feed your dog if they're afraid of them. And if they're tossing treats to them, people are almost invariably tempted to toss treats between them and the dog so that the dog has to still come closer to them to get the treat. That isn't very helpful. So next week, what we're going to talk about actually is human behavior. All the human behaviors that can increase or decrease your success with training around strangers and your dog's ability to eat. This kind of thing, tossing food close to you, even if you're not trying to hand feed it, so the dog has to come closer, also can set up conflict, can risk a bite. And we don't want that. Okay, so just to summarize real briefly, to increase your dog's motivation to eat, their ability to eat around scary strangers, one thing we can do, and it's probably the number one thing I always try to start with if someone tells me their dog can't eat, is to increase distance from the trigger, from the person. So don't let them approach, don't let your dog approach them. Make sure you have lots of space to move around in and move away. And don't try to set up any situation where the dog has to choose. If they do get interested in the food, they have to choose between, their safety and getting the food. So what we've just covered is why dogs won't eat around people often. And this is because, remember, their motivation to get that food consequence is much lower than their motivation to preserve their life. What else is motivating? Safety, getting distance, whether that means driving away the visitor using aggression or running away themselves. And then, okay, how can we get around these so we can start to train using food and positive reinforcement around strangers? The thing we talked about today, practical approaches to maintaining distance between your dog and the thing they're afraid of. Next week, we are going to talk about the practical approaches with regard to human behavior. Especially once you're getting a little bit closer and working closer with people, what they do matters a lot. So we're going to talk about what things that you can do if you're working with a dog who's afraid of you, or you can instruct your helper or your visitor to do, can help speed up that training and make them, minimally scary. All right, I'm going to put this up and then I'll answer the questions. So if you haven't already downloaded this free guide, if you have a dog who reacts unfavorably to visitors coming to the house, this is our free, it's a PDF with accompanying video examples of ways to set up kind of safe spaces in your house so that your dog can feel better, feel safer, hopefully bark and growl less when you have a visitor over. And we do have a couple notes in there. I know some of you have dogs who can't be separated from you without anxiety and vocalization and barking and whining. So there are some suggestions in there for troubleshooting that, of how can you either help your dog become more comfortable in a confinement area if they don't like being confined, or if they can't be separated from you, how can you still stay pretty close to them while giving them some distance and some kind of protection from exposure to the visitors. So if you don't already have that, take a look at it. It's free. All right, Katie says, here, let me see if I can. I think I can't. All right, I'm just going to put my face back on here. All right, Katie says, our dog won't come for us for a treat if he is unsure of the intent, even if there is no intent, just to give him a treat or unsure of the environment. So I love that you brought that up, because that is kind of related to what I said earlier, where one reason a dog might not be willing to eat is if something about that food, or the way you're offering the food, or you offering food in general, in the past has predicted something scary for them. So this is one reason why we usually advise, like in the reactive dog course, we say, if possible, try to wait until your dog sees a trigger before, cueing an alternative behavior and giving them food. Because you can get a dog who, if you start to take a treat out, they start scanning for danger, because they've learned that the only time you take treats out is when there's a trigger around. The same can happen with our own dogs if, for example, and I have definitely seen this with my own dogs when I've been sloppy with training, if I'm like, look, I have peanut butter over here, and I'm in the bathroom, they're like, they think, a bath is coming. So bringing out the food before something they don't like doesn't make the thing less scary to them, whatever it is they're trying to avoid, and kind of can poison the food, or at least poison that scenario. So usually your best bet there is to break down whatever it is that they don't like and say, okay, we need to back off of this, and train it in small steps, or if you can't avoid it, if it's something you can't avoid doing at all, so that our dog no longer wants to avoid us when we need to do whatever, nail clipping, bathing. Katie, do you have specific situations where like if your dog thinks you're about to do X to him, he doesn't want to come? All right, and then we've got another, I'll wait for that answer, see if you're still on. The other question is, my dog has leash aggression when close to people passing on a hike, but when they're far, he is super fearful. So that is really interesting. I wonder why, I'd be interested to know what you mean by fearful. Like, what are you seeing? But it could be that when he's really close to visitors or to other hikers, he's really, really motivated to drive them away. And so he's going to use that aggressive behavior. Whereas when they're farther away, it might be that fleeing is another way to get space that he's comfortable. If he's on leash, especially, well, you said leash aggression. So yeah, so if he's on leash, if he's close to people, he can only get so far away. So it could be that he's learned, usually lunging, barking, growling will indeed get people to back up a little bit and give you space. And he either hasn't tried that when they're farther away. It probably isn't effective if they're super far away anyway. And perhaps moving away to him is sufficient, even if it's only the 6 or 10 feet of the leash, if the hiker is pretty far away already. So that would be he'd be a good candidate for working in a kind of scenario like you saw little Odie. That was the Cavalier who was sitting on the ground way on the edge of a park and seeing people super far away, where he was totally happy to watch them and eat treats. Like, that's the kind of setup I would try to go for with your dog if you can. Now, that might mean not hiking for a while, or being very vigilant and hiking way off the trail if you hear people coming in the distance, so you can work at a very great distance from them. Katie says, he gets worried about us touching him outdoors, fear of being grabbed, so we can't call him over with high-value treats. Katie, do you think he does he not like being picked up and restrained generally? A lot of dogs don't, which is why I'm wondering if it's the handling per se is scary for him, is unpleasant, and or if he's learned that in some situations outside, handling predicts something else he doesn't like, whether that be you have to go home, or being carried, or being put in the car, being scolded perhaps. Carol says, our dog cannot settle if we have visitors. She constantly paces and stresses, but if we remove her from the room, she cries and whines. She needs to see the visitors, even though she's scared of them. Yeah, and Carol, it might also be being separated from you is hard for her, especially if she knows visitors are in the house. There are some video examples for safe space setups in that Zen Zone handout for dogs who do cry and whine when they're put in another room, so a way that you can stay closer. You may think about what you can do in the house to either create more distance between your pup and the visitors, or if the weather's okay, could you meet outside instead? If you have already tried all the things in the Zen Zone handout, which include blocking visual, blocking sound, giving them lots of nice things to do, you may also consider anti-anxiety medication, talking to your vet about that. They could even potentially do something situational. You could ask them if it's only, the only time your dog's stressed out is when you have visitors in the house. That might be another option. Katie says, we struggle to have him off leash as he won't come to us if he's off leash. He doesn't understand the intent of coming close and touching him in open spaces. And sometimes he doesn't want to come into the flat unless we are in a safe space. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like training coming when called would be good, but you might also, I don't know, Katie, if you have a long line, like one of those 10, 15, they go up to 30 or more feet long lines, that might help give your pup more freedom, and you still have that safety net, so that if he won't come and there's a safety reason to get him to come, at least you have a hold of him. But it might be a good idea to, will he come really reliably in the house? And it sounds like maybe not in the yard if you won't come into the apartment. Do you reward him every time he comes? But he just doesn't want to take it? Loves cuddles and play in safe space. Okay, so he will always come in the long line. Awesome. And will he take, when you get him to you, will he take food? Carol says she's medicated and super fearful. She can't go for walks. So visitors are really scary. Yeah, it might be worth talking to your vet about if you have, if you're going to have visitors somewhat regularly, if there's something you can add just for those times, in addition to looking at every little tweak you can make in the house. We're going to be, I'll take some video on this in a month from now. Some of you have been following Pancake's story, who, the dog we just adopted, who is basically feral a year ago, and now doing quite well with me and better with my husband. My husband's family is coming to stay once everyone's vaccinated for a couple days. So I'm already working on behaviors and setting up spaces and sending him to them to try to make it go more smoothly. But I'll video what how it goes, and if we have to make adjustments on the fly, what we tried and what worked. Because he doesn't like people at all, really. He likes me, and he knows my husband eats meat, so he kind of likes him. Katie says, yes. Okay, so your dog will take food if he comes on a long line, but not if he comes not on a long line? Or is it only if you're, like, reaching for him, he won't take food? Or if you're kind of, like, bent over or hovering like you're gonna reach for him? Is this a little dog you pick up, or is it a bigger dog? This is one of the reasons why, even though it's can be painstakingly slow to work on, that it's important and helpful for us to not force stuff. Yeah, stays at arm's reach. He'll do recall training in the garden, come for treats, but only if in the right mood, we're both present, no distraction. Okay, unsure, and he won't come near us. So it sounds like he's got some fear, probably. Yeah, if he won't come reliably in the yard or garden, then I definitely, for now, don't take him off the long line until he's more reliable. And then if you may want to work, if you're not already working with a trainer one-on-one, you may want to work with someone or try an online recall class. If you want either of those, shoot us you can comment under this video, or you can shoot us an email at admin@dogkindtraining.com, and we'll try to find something that would work for you. With fearful dogs, there's like an extra layer. Because normally, if you're doing recall work with a dog who isn't particularly worried about a lot of things, their top motivation is food. And if you have good food, and you do the training incrementally, they'll come. And it's not that, they're fairly easy to train. A fearful dog, like we've been talking about this hour, they're weighing like safety, survival, like I like food, but I don't want to die, and it's so easy for them to become fearful of things that maybe they weren't before. They're inclined to get worried about things. So like, for instance, reaching or grabbing, a lot of dogs actually will learn to avoid that because they don't like it. But a fearful dog especially, you do it one time and they're like, I'm not coming to you again. So that you might need some more detailed. Okay, your current trainer struggles to work with him sometimes. Oh, and he freaked out. Okay. Yeah, you may need someone who specializes in fear. And you probably are going to want someone who, I'm so glad he started some fluoxetine. Yeah, that should help with his, hopefully, fingers crossed, help with noise sensitivity, and help with his training. But nonetheless, you've got, you have to be so sensitive to the first signs of discomfort with these guys, because they can go into that flight or fight mode, being really scared really soon, really quickly, without a ton of warning. I've been trying to capture as much of that as I can with Pancake, because he doesn't, actually the video I posted in the group yesterday where he's running around playing with me outside, and then I walked toward him too quickly and he, rolled on his back like, please don't kill me. And there were some signs leading up to that, which I ignored to get video, which I shouldn't have done. But being really tuned into those, and knowing how to break things down into what to us might seem like ridiculously small pieces, but it's what they need, can that's probably what you're going to need to help your pup. All right, everybody. It's so nice to see you all here. We are going to talk about, and this, so those of you who have dogs, especially who are fearful of you or someone in your household, next week might be particularly helpful. We're going to talk about our own behavior and things that we do that inadvertently that creep dogs out. And how can we change our body language and what we do with our bodies, basically, to try to be less intimidating to these dogs. And of course, you can instruct visitors to do these things too. As many of you know, visitors don't always follow instructions, nor do spouses. But we'll still talk about ways to make it more likely that your visitors will follow the instructions. All right, everybody, have a beautiful week. I'll see you online. Let me know how the training goes. If you change anything, try maybe greater distances or outdoor introductions with your fearful pups. And we'll dig in deeper next week. All right, bye, everybody.